It is 3 a.m., and you are staring at the ceiling. Your phone is face down on the nightstand. You promised yourself you wouldn't check it. You start doing math. 5 hours of sleep left. If you fall asleep right now, 4 hours. 3. You feel broken, like your body is failing at the one thing it is supposed to know how to do. But the real answer is far stranger. Your body isn't failing. It was Tuesday. Go back 500 years, before electric light existed anywhere on Earth. Night didn't mean unconsciousness. It meant a different kind of life began. People went to sleep not long after dark. There was nothing else to do. No screens, no street lamps, nothing to push the day later. Then, a few hours in, they woke up. Not from a nightmare, not from noise. They simply surfaced, the way you might surface from a nap, calm and alert. Historian Roger Ekirch spent over a decade combing through diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe, and he found something on nearly every page. People described two sleeps separated by an hour or more of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. They called it first sleep and second sleep. In that gap, people didn't panic. They got up, they tended the fire, they talked quietly with whoever shared their bed. Some prayed, some had sex, some just lay there, half awake, thinking. Then, eventually, they drifted back down into second sleep and woke again at dawn. This wasn't rare. It wasn't a niche custom in one village. Ekirch found references to it across centuries and across an entire continent, treated as so ordinary that writers barely explained it. Why would they? Night stopped being dark. People stayed up later. Bedtimes compressed. The two separate sleeps got squeezed into one continuous block because there was no longer a long, dark, empty evening to split them apart. Within a couple of generations, segmented sleep wasn't just less common. It was forgotten entirely. People stopped expecting a midnight waking, so when it happened anyway, it felt like something was wrong with them. Here is where it gets stranger. Sleep researcher Thomas Vare ran an experiment in the Itenjobajoshimao that, by accident, recreated the ancient pattern. He had a group of people live for weeks, with no artificial light after sunset, just long winter-length nights of darkness, the way humans lived before electricity was invented. Within about a month, almost everyone in the study split into two sleeps, separated by 1 to 3 hours of quiet wakefulness, just like the diaries Ekirch had been reading. Their bodies hadn't learned a new trick. They'd simply stopped being told, by light, to suppress an old one. This raises an uncomfortable question. What if your 3 a.m. waking isn't insomnia at all? What if it is your biology reaching for a rhythm that artificial light interrupted and modern life never gave back? That doesn't mean every midnight waking is healthy or harmless. Anthropologist Carol Worthman, who has studied sleep across dozens of traditional societies, points out that the pattern people actually lived with for most of history wasn't deep, unbroken, aether sleep at all. It was flexible, often fragmented, shaped by fires to tend, infants to soothe, and predators to listen for. Segmented sleep wasn't a luxury. In many cases, it was a survival strategy. So if your ancestors were waking at night anyway, what were they doing with that time mostly? Very little, and that is the part modern life has the hardest time accepting. They didn't reach for a device. There was no device. They lay in the dark, half aware, often half dreaming, in a state some sleep scientists now call a liminal zone between sleeping and waking. Thoughts surfaced without the urgency of daytime thinking. Some described their nighttime waking as a kind of quiet meditation, the closest thing they had to therapy or journaling. Sleep scientist Jerome Siegel, who has studied sleep patterns in 3 of the last hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tiasamanane of Bolivia, found something else striking. These groups, who have no electricity and no exposure to industrial schedules, also wake briefly during the night. But they don't think of it as a problem. They don't even have a word that translates cleanly to insomnia. Waking in the dark is simply part of the architecture of night, the same way breathing out follows breathing in. What they do have consistently is something modern sleepers often lack: total darkness and a fixed, early start tied to actual sunrise. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this story. Your brain doesn't measure time the way a clock does. It measures light. A cluster of cells behind your eyes, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, reads brightness levels and uses them to set your internal clock, the one that decides when you feel sleepy and when you feel alert. For nearly all of human history, that clock had one input: the sun, bright by day, dark by night. No exceptions. Now your clock gets contradictory signals. A bright phone screen at 11 p.m. tells your brain it is still daytime. A dim, overcast morning tells it the day hasn't really started. Circadian researcher Charles Czeisler has shown that even 2 hours of screen-level light exposure before bed can delay the release of melatonin, your body's signal that night has begun, by an hour or more. So when you wake at 3 a.m. and panic, you are often layering two separate things on top of each other. One is ancient and probably harmless, a brief surfacing your ancestors would have recognized instantly. The other is modern and very real, a circadian rhythm pushed out of alignment by light your biology was never built to interpret. The ancient piece doesn't need fixing, the modern piece might, which means the anxiety itself, the racing thoughts, the dread of tomorrow, the mental math about lost hours, may be doing more damage than the waking ever did. Sleep researchers have a name for this loop. The harder you try to force sleep, the more alert your brain becomes, because alertness is, biologically, a stress response. Your ancestors didn't fight the waking. They didn't lie. They're calculating how exhausted they'd be in the morning. They just existed in it quietly, until sleep pulled them back, under maybe. That is the part worth borrowing back. Not the candlelight, not the fire tending, not the absence of electricity, just the absence of panic. The simple, almost forgotten idea that being awake in the dark for a while isn't a malfunction. It is 3 a.m. again, somewhere, for someone. But maybe it isn't broken. Maybe it is just